Hey, Charles, Sandy.
Hey, how's it
How
going?
you
Hi,
doing?
Greg. Hi, Charles.
Good evening. How's it going?
Good. How about you? Did you recover?
Oh, well, yeah, I did. I had plus I had my stupid dog I've been staying up with my dog. Well, hi, Adam. How are you doing? We're just about ready to get going here. Hey, Kevin.
Good morning.
Yeah. Well, I think, let's see, here we got another person. Steve Shea. Let's see here. Okay. Well, it's Ivan.
Ivan.
Okay.
Garrett.
Yes, he's got a pseudonym. Well,
I'm using my wife's computer.
that's okay. Well, hey, Adam, why don't you start if you got a dream or something, and we'll just get going here and try to get everybody in we can.
Sure.
You know? But go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I was Gary actually suggested that I join because he and I have been talking about some stuff regarding the Anima, and so I'm not. I think almost everybody here, maybe not Charles. Knows
Charles is here.
Yeah, I don't think Charles knows. Like I shared a lot in the Saturday group last time. But,
Charles was there at the end. Yeah.
Exactly. And one of the things that I shared was that I was in a spiritual community for 27 years, and it was a celibate spiritual community. So now that I am in a one-on-one relationship with a significant other, in this case, a woman, it is becoming highly apparent that I need to work on connecting with my anima so I'm not constantly projecting that onto her. So I've had a series of dreams over the last like 2 or 3 weeks because I've been actively working on this. And for a long time, while I was in the community, I had dreams about like a little girl. And I associated her with, there's a nun named Teresita de Lisieux. She was a Catholic nun. Our community had a lot to do with her. But since leaving the community, now I started having dreams with this like big man that sort of had hair like my significant other, whose name is Claudia. And it was as if, because I know that I was projecting onto Claudia, and it was like trying to dissociate like the sacred feminine part of myself from her. And, you know, as things progressed, later I had dreams of like a girl, again, like a girl that was about to enter puberty, as sort of like a guiding figure for me.
That was Jung's first dream of an anima too, if you remember.
Interesting, I didn't know that. Huh.
At the emerald table, the dove flies in and it turns into a little girl, and then plays with his children, comes back, gives him a hug, then turns into a dove. And first came in as a dove and then turned into the little girl. And then it says, she says, I can only come when the male dove is busy with the 12 dead.
Oh, interesting.
But that was his first anima. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's significant, and that prompts me to actually share a little bit more of the dream with this girl who didn't look like Claudia, didn't look like me. So it was like actually the first one in which this anima sort of differentiated herself a little bit.
Yeah.
And it was, she was by the ocean, and there were these stones in the ocean that looked like tombstones. And the ocean was coming in, and it was the space between the tombstones that was like a super generative place. And I felt a lot of confidence in this little girl and like just being there present with that. So, you know, I started working with her a little bit with ally work, since we're doing that in our Saturday group. But the experiences that I've had since then, I've had like 2 dreams where there's what seems to be an anima figure who's, in this case, you know, more sexually mature. But there's like a whiteness, a light whiteness associated with her that's like luminous, but almost fluorescent. It's like almost not human, you know? And the one I had last night, which I mentioned to Gary, and he was like, yeah, you should come and share that. So that's why I'm doing it. I was passing by this young woman and I acknowledged her and I said like, oh, excuse me. And she was so happy that I acknowledged her. It was as if she was waiting in some way for me to acknowledge her. And all this time I've been like so desperately wanting to connect with my anima. And it was like, it felt like she really desperately wants to connect with me. So it was nice. So that.
Yeah, that was an image of, now these are very similar to my own. Actually, you know, I was a person who, I was actually a puer eternus. That's somewhat similar to you know, it's a life of living life tangentially. You know, it's a person who doesn't have a lot of history. You know, I mean, they live in somewhat of a, you know, they live actually. Well, let me start with your dream. But I would say the first thing is about the child anima. Now you mentioned that this is the first one that sort of differentiated out. Well, this is the growing part. I'm just saying it is the growing part of the of this differentiation. It's the leading edge, you know, and you know, there is. Meister Eckhart, when he would see God, it was a child, a boy, and so there's this aspect of that the becoming thing in us, the divine coming thing in us, is always has the quality of the promise of youth. You know, this is something that comes up in fairy tales or fairies. The fairies lack nothing, but the one thing they do is they steal babies, human babies, and then they leave changelings, a wizened old fairy in the place of the baby, and then they bring the baby back to the fairy hill. Because the one thing that the fairies lack is the promise of youth. So there is an aspect of generation, that has this aspect of continual renewal. You know, that life is becoming thing. You know, that we're reborn. You know, Meister Eckhart says you're reborn every day. You know, the Buddhist says you're reborn every breath. So there's this aspect of that joy is the inexhaustible energy of life, invincible, always upcoming. You know, so anyway, the one interesting, let's go back to just the 2 dreams here. That now the one that you saw by the ocean, was this the girl, the younger girl?
Yep, the first time she appeared.
Yeah.
As a,
okay, she's by the ocean, and so she's the bridge to the unconscious, and she's closer. She lives close to the realm of images, which is usually represented by the depths of water. You know, it can also be the forest. And now this is so interesting. In the depths are tombstones. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what are tombstones doing in ocean. Okay, someone has been buried there, and the tide is coming in. Okay, but yet the spaces between the tombstones are very generative. You know, so in other words, they seem like there is it's an area of a creative, that has a creative aspect. You know, Jung says that the creative is always feminine, you know, and it's the instructor of the masculine mind, you know. So the masculine mind needs and this is what Jeffrey Raft says too, is that all the images come from water. And I've had this thing constantly in my images, is where all I see is suddenly there's a glass vessel and water's being poured into it. You know, it's sort of this water of life. But anyway, I would say that that anima is okay. There is the bridge to the self. Now, I want to just say one thing about the anima. You know, it is, and the last dream was really interesting too. The joy that you acknowledged the anima. Now, in my dreams, I really had a really bad connection with the anima, and the only time I would ever see her, the real one, would be it'd be dark night. There'd be a window and it'd be black, and suddenly there'd be a flash of light, and she'd be standing outside the window looking in with fury on her face. Wow. And this was because she's being ignored. Yeah. You know, and you know, this is what she says in all the alchemical texts is don't ignore me because I'm black and trapped in the mire. You know, I am this way because I'm being neglected. You know, and whoever comes to see me, I will give into their hands the morning star. So the idea is that the anima is the soul. She's the bridge to the self, and yet we're trapped in some world that is not communicating with her. It can either be the ego world, or it can be the world of anything that's not connecting with direct experience. Yeah. You know, wouldn't have to be an ego aspect to it, but so now the anima is suddenly overjoyed that you're uniting with her, or that you are acknowledging her, or you're making a bridge with her. Now, I have since made peace with my anima, you know, and I'll tell you something, every active imagination I go into, the first thing I do is I hold up my hand and ask her to join me. And then every time I'm going to go into the next step, I say, where is she? Where is she? Come closer, you know. And that way, and then I imagine when I'm doing the pretending that it's me and the anima going into the thing. Now, see, the anima is going to have the opposite functions and that you do. So if, you know, for instance, I'm an introverted intuitive, so my anima is an extroverted sensate. So if I include her in everything I do, I am bringing all four functions into whatever it is I'm doing. Yeah. And plus the fact that she is relatedness, and the aspect of the feminine, the archetypal feminine. Okay, now this is not anything to do with real women, although as above, so below. You know, there is an analogy between the real live woman is the bridge to the outer world, and the anima is the bridge to the inner world. You know, so anyway, that she is the one who brings together. So she's the one who does she's the one who coagulates and brings it down to the earth. She's also is the earth, you know. Yeah. So I mean, when I say that, you know, I feel a surge of hope in my chest. Just as I said that, she is earth. Well, and anyone else, now there, I think these are dreams of something like seeing a vision of what the goal is. But what do you guys think? How about when you start out or Anima experience?
I just had a really interesting dream that I feel like, and it's really short. I just want to throw it in there that I feel like had to do with this. I was sitting at my kitchen table, and there's this young girl, maybe 10, 11 years old, with like blue, purplish hair. And I just turned to her and I'm like, you're so lucky that you get to learn alchemy at such a young age. And then her age starts like shifting very rapidly between like a little bit younger, a little bit older, a little bit younger, a little bit older. And I'm just like very drawn to her and fascinated by her. And then that was it.
Yeah, well, that is, again, she's to be fascinating. You know, I mean, that's the idea of the fascinating aspect of the unconscious. Why would we want to connect with it at all? It needs to be, it is fascinating.
Yeah, I feel like the Anima plays, I mean, this is just my opinion, but I feel like it plays some role as like a beckoning role to provoke some sort of like interest. Like there has to be some sort of attraction on like that. It's one of the things that can like reach that surface level attraction by the fascination, everything.
Yeah, you know, one thing I as far as Sandy is concerned, I mean, some of the most beautiful dreams I've heard have been yours. And I think the reason that they are so attracted to me is because they are coming from a different departure point. You know, I mean, they're actually coming from a departure point which I don't have access to. You know, but what do you now normally? Go ahead. Oh
No, I just finished. I was wanted to say something, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I was. That was a really nice dream. I was just thinking about also Anima as a life force, and so he revitalizes, and I don't know, like you mentioned, you know, you went from this very spiritual, and now you're sort of also moving to something next. You're thinking of doing the Specifica and so on, and I don't know if that has some connection, but you know, a young Anima, I feel like is also a something, you know, that is in the making, and is also somewhat also carrier somewhat of the self, the innocence of purity of the self. So yeah, but it would be also interesting to see, like, to ask you, like, do you feel like your experience has sort of, you know, really revitalized you in a profound way, not just, you know, I got a bit more energy, you know, that we can get from training, but I was thinking if it has yes, I don't know if that could connect to the Anima image.
Well, you know, in the case of Edward, we're going to meet 4 animas, actually. You know, and the anima is a very good term is the life force. And you know, I don't want to go too much in unless you want to share, Adam, of the aspect of sometimes if you're in a spiritual community that is not honoring the body, okay, that you know, there was a guy named, you know, the guy that took over the Jung Institute, his name was Guggenbull Craig, you know, and he said, now this is him, not me speaking. He said, until Christianity will have ritual, some kind of a ritual sexual thing on the altar, it's not going to be grounded in our own humanity. Now,
Yeah.
you know, that's a pretty extreme thing, and he needs to explain himself. But you know, there's the aspect of what Hermes says in the Emerald Tablets, which is so beautiful to me. I mean, is that its strength is perfected when it returns to the earth. You know, until we are walking on earth, and you know what is a mystery to me about this is the mystery of being alive, is to have your feet on the ground. You know, the mystery of being dead is not having your feet on the ground. You know, but while we're alive, that's what I think we're being asked to do, and you can't really do that without being a whole being of possessing both the feminine and the masculine. So women are closer to the earth. You know, one thing that Eros, the original image of Eros, was of the blood bond. You know, that the woman through the umbilical cord gave blood to her child. Then when the umbilical cord was cut, there was never a broken bond between her and the child because of the blood bond. So this was an unbreakable bond, regardless of there was an umbilical cord there or not. And so this is Eros, and this is bringing together is an absolute unbreakable bond that exists between people. Whereas the spiritual aspect, the logos, is separated. Of course, it is separated on purpose too, because it differentiates, it separates, and where the it separates and analyzes and gives names, where the Eros brings together and unites. Sandy, what do you have to say? I don't know how much experience you've got with the Anima other than being an Anima, having it projected on you by crazy people.
Oh, well, I like learning about the Anima because you're right. I don't know very much at all. So I was just trying to listen to what Adam said, and well, it felt big to me, his dreams.
It does.
And the thing that stood out to me was when you said there's space in between the tombstones.
Oh, that is.
I mean, that was really
Beautiful.
great. You said you had confidence in the little girl, and somehow it was related to the space. Did I hear you right?
Yeah. That space was generative, and somehow her being there, it was like it made it possible for me to connect to that space. Yeah.
That's pretty big, you know. And then she wants to connect.
Yeah. Which is so encouraging for me.
Yeah.
Well, you know, people might want to ask ourselves as a question here, maybe everybody can chime in here, is what would it mean to peer in to the depths of the unconscious and see tombstones there? Now, this is would mean they're in the unconscious. Now, okay, when in a baptism, okay, here's what happens in a baptism. This was the original baptism, which is pre-Christian, by the way. John the Baptist was not a Christian, you know. The person would be immersed in the depths where they would be held until they almost drowned. In other words, they needed to experience symbolic death and then be brought to the surface. So there's an aspect to me of that's the tombstones at the bottom of the ocean are related to symbolic death that needs to occur. You know, a rebirth, and death always implies not annihilation; it implies transition. Okay. Now, also, there's a very interesting image of the tide is coming in, so the unconscious is expanding. You know, it's coming into the conscious world, and who is presiding over the scene? It is the guide of souls, the Anima, the psychopomp, and she is there as the mediatrix between us and this the transition of going into the depths and having a rebirth. What do you think, Gary?
Well, I was really interested by the with the tombstones and with the anima being down there amongst them, and then the ocean coming in. I mean, the ocean can also, you know, it's like sort of a rejuvenating thing too. And so, you know, the tombstones are marking something lost, but that she's amongst them. You know, I almost wonder, like, well, okay, there's something lost here, but maybe this is like, you know, things being called back. Was how it hit me, because I mean, why else would these be in the ocean, and you know, and having this kind of water of life coming over, you know, with the anima calling forth.
Yeah,
That was that was my main addition.
What do you think, Ivan, yourself? Do you give the mathematician's view? Or I'm just kidding.
So I don't know if I agree that the tombstones necessarily are representing something lost. To me, they might represent some connection to the past, like something maybe that we don't know directly, that's buried beneath. But as to me, that's almost the connection to our ancestors, the you know, what's come before us that has shaped us now that maybe we don't fully understand, but has a significant impact on us nonetheless.
You know, in the Red Book, there's a wonderful scene where Jung's anima is going under the water and keeps bringing up all kinds of relics. Like she'll bring up a stone, a sword, and you know, she keeps bringing up things from the depths, old ancient relics, yet it's being done by the anima. So she's bringing up the everything that she's bringing up, and anything that comes from the depths is a potential, is something that if we have a dialogue with it, we can create a symbol, you know. And the symbol is the transcendent function, something that is going to transform not only the center of gravity of our awareness and expand our consciousness at the same time. That's what imagination means, is to magnify consciousness, but it also changes the next image that comes. So it's leading somewhere, you know. Kevin, do you have anything to add to this? And then we can sum up.
Yeah, I was just thinking as well. I think it would be also very interesting, Adam, to hear your thoughts on this tombstone, like, because you probably have some idea of it already, and pretty much probably very strong to you. So I would like, it would be nice to hear like what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, what would you think if you really saw tombstones under the ocean, for instance? You know, I mean, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things, just to clarify the image of the dream. Actually, the tombstones were not at the bottom of the ocean; they were right on the shore.
On the shore, okay. All right.
But I can, some of the things that I know that this is related to are, and this is really personal, but you know, my father killed himself when I was 12. Okay. The whole experience of being in a spiritual community, like Craig was saying, there's a real lack of grounding. At least in my case, there was. Now, originally these communities were formed with a lot of manual work. You know, manual work was like there, I think, I'm realizing now, to ground things a lot. But my last 15 years were sitting in a chair in an office doing like IT work, which is not really grounded in a lot of ways.
No.
So, and what I'm experiencing with my partner is, you know, a lot of like feelings of abandonment. So there's really old stuff coming up. And there's new beginnings, because I'm like, it's almost hard to imagine how a person could be in a bigger transition. I suppose if you had just had your you know, if you were a refugee or something and going, like having to go to a different country, that would be a bigger transition in some ways. But, you know, I don't have a job. The thing that I've been doing for the last 27 years, I'm not doing anymore. Now I'm in a relationship. I've never had one like this before. There's so many things changing in my world. So the generative and the transformation aspects and, you know, and sexuality and things like that, they're all parts of it. And like realizing I have to dissociate from my mother. I mean, there's really a lot of deep stuff going on. So,
well, yeah, I mean, I didn't want to mention about the Puer Aeternus, but you know, the reason the Puer Aeternus, Peter Pan, you know, and the Little Prince, they live in the land where children never grow up. And the reason they don't want to leave is, why should I? This is where I experience bliss. They are really living in Eden, which is the maternal realm, you know. Now, the idea, I think, of grounding too, at least for my own myself, is that it does involve a relationship with an outer woman, you know, you need to experience the obsidian stone smoothing. This is an image that Marie-Louise von Franz had of a bear smoothing a stone. And she said, this is the stone of relationship, you know, that the two people who are encountering each other, you know, smooth each other because they have rough edges. You know, now there's an aspect of that that's grounding, but the other aspect, I think, of for my own self was to have a rich inner relationship with the feminine. And this was to me, and it isn't even just the feminine. It is the rooted, vegetative world, the world whose roots reach into the earth. You know, this into the chthonic dark earth. Because my problem was, I'm all light. I'm no substance. There's no substance there. You know, and see, light is in need of substance, and substance is in need of light, you know, and they both need each other. And so this dream is so beautiful, and I might have something to say about it later too, because I think, you know, I have to brood on things, you know, and it starts to incubate and hatch within me. But yeah, I think the most beautiful images are the ocean, the tombstones on the shore, the tide, the depths of coming into the conscious world, and by there is the guide of souls. Now, this is sort of the new homeland. You know, this is my new homeland here, and it's a strange world, and I have to orient myself to it. You know, but anyway, while everybody, why don't Sandy? I don't really know the order here, but I don't think Sandy's given us a dream for a while, and she's always got some really good ones.
Well, actually, can I say one thing to Adam? I thought it was interesting because I was taking notes, and what really struck me for some reason was the space.
Yes.
Did that strike you?
Oh, very much. It's like essential, really, to the whole thing.
It felt essential, yeah. And it was like you had a lot of confidence in the little girl, and it was generative, and it made me wonder, because like Craig was saying, the vegetative world and brooding, that if that space in between was the space in between what you were and what you're going to become, and in that space it will be generative, and you can count on your feminine, she said. Does that resonate at all? Or
yeah, definitely. You know, maybe one more thing I could add, so we can also go on to somebody else. I'm sure that you probably all have dreams that you'd like to share too. Is I've been studying the myth of Eros and Psyche. And so one of the things that happens in that myth is that, so Eros is the son of Aphrodite, and they have this kind of like incestuous relationship. You know, like Aphrodite gives like Eros, this French kiss, basically. And it's like she doesn't want to let go of her son, Eros. Yet the whole story is about Psyche, who is a woman, a mortal woman, and how she's trying to relate to Eros. So this is, in some ways, as I understand it, it's a story of a woman's work with her animus, also a man's work with his anima. And part of it has to do with the differentiation on the man's part from his mother, because Eros finally in the end like joins with Psyche when he like basically rebels against his mother, you know, which is, it's probably a little bit of an infantile or not mature way of understanding it, maybe because of where I am right now. But just differentiating even in the sacred feminine between the mother and like and a different kind of relationship also, you know, I think that's an important aspect of it.
And she brings into birth, Jung points this out, not a son, but a daughter.
Yeah.
Psyche does. So he says that she turns into a kind of a superior, an archetypal anima rather than a more intimate anima. And so then the intimate anima is her daughter. So, I mean, I don't know what that actually means yet, but, you know.
Yeah. I think her daughter's name is Joy.
Joy, yes.
If I recall, yeah.
And that has to do with the energy of life, really. The original meaning of it, joy is the inexhaustible energy of life, the life force, you know, so that the cornucopia, you know, that the grail has to do with joy, you know. Well, anyway, I did draw a little picture while you were talking. I don't know if you can see it, but
yeah, that's good.
Well, you know, I just like to do that and then sort of paint them. That is an actual active imagination, because you're lending attention to the dream, and it is that's those, just the image itself, because you know what they're saying is our job is not to understand it, it's to see, see, S-E-E, to perceive. And so the understanding often is the understanding is a sometimes dreams are so beautiful and they don't really seem to have a cognitive point, you know, but they are more beautiful than any cognitive point could ever be.
Yeah.
You know?
So Adam, what does that space mean to you? The space in between them.
You know, it's interesting because I hadn't thought about that until you just asked me. And one thing I'm perceiving, I've actually talked to Gary a little bit about this, is I feel like there's a space in my heart which is associated with loss. But it's like, and I haven't been able to figure out what to do with that. And part of me realizes it's not really a space. It's like thinking that you don't have something, but you are whole. But when you asked that, it made me feel something in my chest, like that's a generative space that seems to be among the tombstones. You know, I haven't gone through the experience yet. Yeah.
Do you think that you had a father figure in your life later after your father?
You know,
masculine aspect.
There was a man that my mother got involved with who died soon afterwards of cancer. I once had a therapist to try to work through these things right at the end. He died. The spiritual director of COF, who's now it's a woman, but before that, really took me under his wing and very much encouraged me. And then in the community, there's like a person who's like the leader. So I had him as a father, kind of a father figure for a very long time. But he was an Aquarius, which, I mean, just my experience of him was he's like very emotionally distant person, you know. So it's always been a real challenge for me to get that effective connection, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think the feminine is always healing, no matter what happens. So I mean, I just talking about myself.
Yeah.
To me, it is the feminine is the grounding, healing, transforming aspect, and it's because the thing is, when you're a man, there is or a woman, there's consequences from being a man or a woman, and so when you see in your dream an image of the opposite or the contrasexual, it typically is a beckoning call, because there seems to be a natural attraction between there's a spectrum, but there is an attraction to the other. So there is a tension. Okay. So now the tension between a man and a man is not the same as tension between a man and a woman. And unless you have tension, you don't have energy flow. So if you're a woman and a dream figure is a man, there is a different that has a different tension than if there's a woman in the dream, So the aspect of the contrasexual for either a man or a woman in a dream has a catalytic effect, of something going to occur because the distance between them is greater, and so the connecting those two is more difficult than a man and a man or a woman and a woman. In most cases, I'm perfectly open. I mean, somebody did a study that a certain percentage of men, their soul or anima figure is can be a man, depending on what their orientation is. But anyway, that's above my pay grade.
Well, just to add to that real quick, I happened to read an article that my partner recommended that I read, and they were saying it's really necessary to recognize gender diversity, and that what has been very much described as anima animus, really probably there's a lot more diversity to that should be taken into consideration, although those sorts of processes are maybe universal, perhaps. The way different people experience them and in what degree in a gender way, it probably varies,
Oh, well, definitely. And especially if you're talking about how our psyches our personas and our egos are constructed, and I really, that's not what Jung is addressing. And it's sometimes hard to talk about it because people associate it with some kind of outer form. And what he's really talking about is the eternal archetypal feminine, which is not human. I mean, you mentioned the radiant faces that almost didn't look human. When I'm seeing an anima or a figure in my active imagination, and I want to see her face, I ask her to shine for me, shine. And she actually does. There's a slight, a very, very vague image of a radiant face, but I'm going to show a diagram tomorrow because we're meeting 4 anima figures in Edward's case of that Erich Neumann, who by the way wrote Amor and Psyche. Is that the book you're reading, Edward?
That's the one I read.
Yeah. And he also wrote the book The Great Mother, and it's a book from the Great Mother. And then he also wrote The Origins and Histories of Consciousness, which if you don't read it 5 times, you don't get it. Well, anyway, Sandy, how about you and your wonderful dreams? And then we'll try to hit everybody else, Charles too. But let's, I don't remember what the order is, but I think Sandy, Gary, Kevin, do you guys think that's it or not?
Well, I think last week I had a turn, so.
Oh, you did? Okay. Who do you think is next then? Is there, you say you, Gary?
I think I had a turn last week too. I don't think
Yeah.
it's me.
Yeah, okay. Well, how about,
I don't think I've heard a dream from Kevin in a while though.
yeah, Kevin, why don't you, I think the last one we heard from you was where you viewed the self, the indigenous self, looking at yourself.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have perhaps somewhat of an, I don't know if it's an extension of that, but yeah, I had a dream probably 1 to 2 weeks ago, and I was so I like to share not too long dreams, but but anyway, so I was in front of my grandmother's yard, and I was teaching this girl martial arts, this black woman martial arts, and there were other doing the same, and we ended up in a corner, and both of us fell down, and obviously I was on my back, and she sort of come on top of me, and yeah, and we had this attraction towards each other, and so we kissed, and so after that I took up a phone, I think, which was my phone, and I read on the phone, I don't know if it talks about her or what type of relationship it was, but what I read was Waliala. Waliala in Arabic, in Islam, it's God's friend, basically. The Wali means a God's friend, Waliala. And I don't
Friend
know
of
if
God,
that's,
is that what you're saying?
friend of God, yeah.
Yes.
And yeah, and so I don't know if that reflected that relationship, but I just remember there was association between what I read on the phone and her, even though I didn't feel she was any numinous in that sense. I didn't feel that. For me, she was more like just an ordinary, yeah. Anyways, and the next scene is that there were many black people, and me and her was showing them something, and now I wasn't the guy anymore. I was looking myself from the outside, as you do in dreams, and I realized I am a black person. I was a black person again, like in the dream. Like I was lying. Yeah, I was sort of showing something on. Yeah, I wasn't standing, and she was. We were showing the other people something. I don't know if it was a dance or anything, but she was a black girl with long hair, braids, and I also realized that once I looked myself from the outside, I was this black person. So I don't know.
Now you don't mean African, you just probably mean more indigenous, correct?
The last time it was more indigenous. You know,
Yeah.
I watched a YouTube about the indigenous and their conversion, but this time it was more Afro-American, like
It's
Afro-American. You see, like
Yeah.
Afro-American, like
Okay. Well, okay, you start out, you're in your grandmother's yard. So you're in, is it your mother's grandmother or your mother's mother or father's mother?
Yeah, my mother's mother.
Okay, you're in the mother of the mother's yard. So she's the great mother. Okay. This is the Manya Mater. She's the great mother. And you're in her yard and you are teaching the Anima something, a secret martial arts. It's sort of an Asian discipline that you're teaching her. And you have an attraction to her and you kiss her. Now, this is something always, it's very delicious because it's, I sometimes I had trouble catching the Anima's eye. I would try to look in her eyes and she would always avert her eyes. And I wanted to look right in, and so it is, it is that you are connecting and relating to a figure in the unconscious in an intimate fashion. Okay. And then she says in a foreign tongue that she's the friend of God. Well, that is what the Anima is. She's the guide of souls. She's the mediatrix between us and the center. And it's said of her that she has a very intimate friend with whom she confides in always, the self, the center. So she has a very intimate friend. So she's the friend, the intimate friend of the unconscious. She is the unconscious, by the way. You know, she's the image of the unconscious. She's the personification of the unconscious. Think of that when you see the anima or the animus. They are the personification of the unconscious in a form that we can relate to, you know, where the self is the wisdom of the unconscious, the wise old man or the wise old woman. So then she's the friend of God, and then there's something that now that you are teaching to a group of people who have a slightly different culture than you. Let's put it that way. Their culture is different. You know, one thing that James Hillman says, and I really agree with him, is that we should never identify people by their color. You know, you should identify them by their homeland. You know, so you know this is an African person or something like that. But it's the only aspect there is that we are not equating a color with the figure that we're encountering here. What we're encountering is a culture that is not ours. So I'm not exactly sure what that means, and I'm a little tiptoey because I don't want to get myself in trouble. But anyway, so let's just I'm going to just quickly review it one more time and see if I get somewhere. Okay. I'm in the mother of the mother's yard. I'm teaching in Asian arts to the anima. There is a connection. That's the third scene. The fourth scene is she identifies herself as the friend of God. And then the fourth or final scene is that now you and the anima together are teaching things to a group of people who are not you. Now, teaching, what does teaching mean? You know, we have some knowledge that we're imparting to someone else. I mean, I would say mostly in dreams, we should be the one that's getting the knowledge imparted to us. You know, we're the dumb ones, you know. But anyway, let's maybe somebody else can talk and then I can think. How about you, Charles?
Geez, I don't know. I think the whole dream obviously is really interesting, but that through the martial arts you're engaging in a physical, grounded way. You're taking this spiritual figure and interacting with them in a totally grounded physical way, and that is what leads to this revealing that she is the friend of God, and that is what allows you to connect. That it's like it's brought down to the earth so that a connection can be made, and with that connection then there has to be something there that then allows you to gnosis or whatever, because then you go on to teaching. Now that you've made the connection with the anima, with the friend of God, she seems to have imparted you with something that now you can share. And how recently was this dream?
I was 1 to 2 weeks.
Okay.
It was after my last dream, and I don't know, my dreams has been very grounded in that sense. You know, they have indigenous, and you have and in this dream, I end up being a black person. You know, afterwards, I was actually a black person looking myself from the outside. And yeah, and I had a dream 2 days ago, no, few days ago, and I immersed myself in a cactus. I became the cactus, and I didn't become that for a very long time, but I was looking at it and I became it, like a point inside the cactus, and I went out again. And my interest, if it goes back to what you said, Charles, like my interest these days has been really not so much rationalizing the self as it is as much as it is capturing the essence of God in heart, if that makes sense. The lover of God, the Sufism. But the dream was before sort of the discovering of Sufism, which I feel like I'm more or less doing now. Like I heard the term Sufism, but I haven't really dived into it like I have done these 3 days, if that makes sense. I really understood what does the Sufism means, and it goes back to the dream. And we talked about Valiala, which is a term I've been interested for a long time, because even in mosque, I said in mosque, like, how can I know God? You know, I don't want to pray 5 times and not know God. I don't want to waste time believing, and that would, for me, that makes sense. And so that term has been an interest. But yeah, I feel like what you say about actually now wrestling with the anima rather than just rationalizing, which I've done many years. I'm still doing, but now I'm sort of grounding it more. I'm on my back right now, and she's sort of on top, and
It's wrestling with the angel, kind of like Jacob or something. You know, there's that's it. You know, in the martial arts, that's an ancient Asian spiritual tradition. It's not necessary. It wasn't. It was beginning. It was a spiritual tradition. You know, and you and the anima are learning it, and then you then after that, there's a moment of Eros, and which is relatedness, and then she identifies herself as the friend of God, and then you after that you and her are trying to, I can't go, I don't know what the next part means. I'll have to think about it. Or that you're actually trying to impart whatever you learned in those first 4 scenes to someone else. So we have to first find out what you learned in the first 4 scenes. You know, what about you, Gary?
Yeah, well, I was really fascinated that it was, first off, we have martial arts. And I mean, this is something that's very physical. And then we have the Eros relationship. And then on his phone, he gets the message that
That's
this
something.
is, the friend of God. And it's like, hey, wake up. It's not what you think, I mean, that's just, it's like, if this is a teaching dream, it's like saying, you're thinking it's one thing, but it's not, it's something else.
The teaching aspect, I mean, I'm trying to figure out what do we do when we learn? I mean, we are really, the difference between wisdom and knowledge is interesting. If we are learning wisdom, that means we're experiencing a transformation of the center of gravity of our awareness is moving closer to being an active imagination all the time is what you're becoming more whole. And the reason you're becoming more whole is because the inner world is getting petals on it, like in Sandy's flower. It's getting, Sandy had a dream of a flower with petals on only one side. And then as she looked at the flower and looked at it, the longer she looked at it, every petals would have formed on the side it was missing. And this is really what we're trying to do in Jungian psychology, is to have all the petals form on the other side of the flower. So in learning wisdom, which is a knowledge of life and not a knowledge of facts, you know, it is the idea of teaching and learning means to learn how to learn how to be you really are giving up the ego a little bit and moving into the original purpose of our rhizome, our root, our seed has a purpose that the ego doesn't know anything about, you know. And for it to flower and everything, the ego needs to become the servant of the root, the servant of the seed, and actually, you know, to become the to be, you know, to actually, the only way that these images in the depths can become conscious is through an ego, you know. But the ego needs to know that it's supposed to be the reflecting mirror and the talk and the point of dialogue, and that's its role. It's not to spin off into the ether and leave its roots and its nature. That's what makes us broken. So I'm just saying that that's the teaching and the wisdom that we're learning should be something along those lines, you know. And so if we're teaching that other aspect, but anyway, I'm babbling. How about you, Ivan?
Craig? Oh, go
What?
ahead. I could save you for a second from that if you
Yeah,
want.
sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Just one thing which occurred to me was the fact that Kevin said that he was also from this, if we want to use like Craig's terminology, from this other culture when he was teaching them. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's significant. I'll relate this a little bit to my dream in that I felt like I was that girl. So there's something like very experiential about that. And like just using my intellectual faculties with this, it's almost, to me, it seems like sort of an identification with the other, you know. There's somehow bridging the gap somehow. And I don't know what that means for Kevin, you know, why that particular group of people also would be significant, but maybe there's something there that's very like visceral, that there might be something involved.
Well, he seems to want a relationship with that aspect of your culture. There's a longing in you, or a longing from that side. What do you think, Kevin? Because it keeps coming up. It's recurring.
Yeah, I'm half Filipino and half Norwegian.
Were you born in Norway?
I noticed. I was born in Norway, but yes, but I came to the Philippines where I was a kid, and I went back to Norway when I was 7. And so my first culture, my first language is Bisaya, which is a Filipino language. And but what I learned in Norway compared to the Philippines is that the Philippines has very high, or they're very high in terms of emotional intelligence and social interaction. People don't think of it that way, but that's, yeah, they are very in tune with everyone's feeling, like everyone's needs. And in Norway, for example, it's totally opposite. Everyone wants to have.
They're sensates. Yeah. They are absolute sensates. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
How their religion is to go out into nature. I mean,
yeah,
they're pagan. And they're very pagan.
And
I'm a Norwegian, also, by the way. So.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I associated someone with Afro-American. You know, they came from another continent into America, and I feel like I feel like they are, even though they are still American in that sense, the root is still somewhat also in this yeah, in this, I don't know, people-oriented culture, people-oriented. So that's what I associate with maybe Afro-American or Philippines. It's the intelligence of people. It's not the intelligence of a system or
There you go.
intellect. Mm. So
These are people
it's
more related to the Eros world, you know, that are
mm,
more related to the idea of community and you know some type of a tradition of belonging. You know, there's a tradition of belonging there. That there's some aspect, possibly because you're living in two worlds, that especially, you know, in America it's different because we are so disassociated from our roots. But I mean, in the old country like Norway or in the Philippines, the people who live there have lived there for 10,000 years, you know, and you know, they have a little bit different connection to the soil than we do. So there can be an aspect, if you're not a part of that tradition wholly, that you're kind of held as sort of never really part of the aspect there. So sometimes the idea of a very closely knit culture has this tradition of belonging that is, but it comes up often, and we're gonna have to see, Kevin, if it comes up in any more dreams that you have, because it's a very interesting. But the thing I like is don't forget that you're in the yard of the Great Mother, and you're meeting the Anima there, and you are going through something like Gary's Tai Chi or whatever it is he does. You know, there's a ritual act, almost a ritual dance, you know, that you're doing, and with the Anima, and then she identifies herself as a friend of God. Just those four parts right there are very important. The fifth part I would put on hold for a while because I don't get it yet. But I think what we really need is a dream series from you that brings up this topic. And I think we've had 2 dreams like this now that you've told us anyway. So how about you, Ivan? Do you have a dream?
Yeah. Yeah, should I go ahead and start on it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm in like it's a house or a really dingy apartment. So it's my normal family, but it's not where I actually live. And so it's definitely not numinous, I guess I should say. And my wife and kids are outside playing in the backyard there, and they're out with my 3 dogs. And I have like 3 little white, fluffy, poodleish, barky dog things. And I'm looking out the window at them, and I notice there's a 4th dog. It's another little white dog.
There you go, 4th dog.
And actually, so I'll show you. I'm in my backyard right now. So it's kind of unintentional, but I have this like swing set castle.
You always have a 4th aspect to everything.
Yeah, this is another one with a 4th aspect, and this 4th aspect felt meaningful. So the dog is on a box on like that castle swing set thing I'm showing you, and they don't see it. I'm looking out the window, but they're playing around it, and this dog is just staring at me. It's this little white fluffy dog, and it kind of has this intense look, and it's just staring at me, and I'm like, this is amazing, there's this animal there. And so I'm trying to call out to my wife, and in real life and in my dream, she's a little hard of hearing, and she's not noticing me, and I'm waving my arms at her, and she's looking at me like, what do you want? And I'm trying to whisper because I don't want to scare off the dog, you know. So they decide to come in. She comes in, she's like, what are you bugging me about? And I'm like, there's a little dog out there, don't you see it? And so she's like, what? And I gotta go see it. And I go out the door to go see this little dog. And my 2-year-old son comes out right behind me, and he starts running away from me. And suddenly the dream shifts, and I'm chasing my 2-year-old son down this public street. And we're right by like a school, and the school, like everyone's gotten out, and there's just all these people mingling. and he's weaving between all these people. And I'm chasing after him, but I can't reach him. And he's running faster than I can, and I'm trying to run through all these people, and he's running right towards like a busy street. And I'm panicking, and that's when I wake up. Oh, and I forgot one aspect of the dream. I don't know the timeline of it, but I noticed all these like ragweeds ripped up by the root, like that are scattered in my house, but not like someone intentionally ripped them up by the root and then placed them carefully inside my house. I don't know what that means. It was very striking in my dream. So
now can we start out with the house or the dingy apartment that you're living in is connected with your yard, but the house is not really yours. Is that right?
Yeah, and just that swing set thing, that castle thing, it's not actually my yard either.
It's not your yard, but there's a connection with the swing set. So I always have dreams like this. It's usually a house I used to live in, and I always said to me, I'm not the master in my own house. There is the place that I'm residing is, I do not own it. Okay, now that means, think about this too. I just think this life that we occupy here, we don't own it. I mean, we're in it, but there's another awareness in it that is the owner of it, you know, and that really is the unique self. It the one that we're supposed to have a connection with. The ego aspect of ourselves thinks it owns this life. It doesn't own it. This is the idea of when you're riding in a car, okay, and you're trying to drive it. The steering wheel doesn't work. The brakes don't work. You're driving it from the back seat. You can't see out the window. I mean, the idea here is that the ego is very proud of itself, and it's sharing this life here, but it's not the only awareness that's in our lives. And if you always are going to stay in the ordinary reality of your own ego, you know, I mean, you're not ever connecting with the idea of since time immemorial man has been not Homo sapiens, not thinking man, but Homo symbolicus or Homo mythicus. He's the creator of symbols, and the creator of symbols is the dialogue that he has with the master of the house, the master of the life we're living in. So anyway, I'm just getting to the fact that I have dreams a lot about houses that I'm an intruder in. I'm living in it, but somebody else owns it. I'm kind of afraid that I'm going to get discovered and kicked out. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying I have the same thing with houses. They show up in my dreams a lot, and rarely do I actually own them.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't actually own them. Now, this one here is not exactly a numinous house. It's a house in disrepair. So this means, you know, sometimes, what would that mean if you're in a house that's in disrepair, that's dingy, that's not being kept up? It's not enough attention is being given to it. You know, it's until it's being that way from neglect. You know, there's an aspect of this thing that we're occupying, this life that we've been given that we think is solely ours, and we're not really the master in it. You know, is if we neglect it, it's I don't know. I'm just feeling, even talking about these kind of things, a sense of anxiety. You know? The fact that we're so neglectful of our purpose, you know, it's just a waste. You know, now I don't know. I mean, I don't think everybody feels that way. But anyway, then you go. There's the three dogs. So those are the three known functions. They're the three instincts. When the animals are near, the instincts are near, and they're the three known aspects of your life. And then the fourth unknown comes in, and it's the door to the inner world, the fourth one, and it certainly is acting like that. It occupies a raised space. It has the gaze of one like who is looking at you as if you're being looked at for the first time. You know, it's looking at you in this aspect of, I see you.
Yes, and it's
You know,
interesting you say that about the door, because part of what I felt after the dream was that this animal had tricked me into opening the door.
mm-hmm. Yeah, well, see, it's the unlocked door to the inner world. The fourth is the always, Gerda always has this thing that three were called, but where's the fourth? You know, and that was actually an ancient Greek thing, that they would always have one chair would be empty, you know, of four chairs. You know, there's an idea of the missing fourth, you know, and of course that is the function which consciousness has no access to. That's what inferior function means. It is the aspect of ourselves that is totally not, it's very instinctive. It's very pagan. It's very non-human, and yet it is our life force. This is how we are going to become whole, is through this alien being, the fourth being that we don't know anything about, you know. But then you call to your wife, and you want somebody else to see this thing looking at you very intensely. So you call to the Anima and say, "Can you see that?" You know. Now the next aspect. Let's not, so let's, you know, in alchemy, you always want to objectify the personal and personify the objective. That means you want to, when you see, now I'm not saying that this is not an objective dream, that you're chasing your son through the crowds, but let's just say for a second, it's symbolic, okay? And then we can go to the personalistic later, but let's just say it's symbolic, okay? The growing thing in your life is running away from you. You know, it's running away from you. And where's it running to? It's running into the mob and the collective, you know, and then it's running towards the busy street. And you know it's in danger, and you know it's not ready to be off on its own. Yet it is elusive, and it's something that a very important aspect of your future, and it's running away from you. So it's sort of the dramatic scene is set first. There almost is a judgment by the fourth, who looks at you very intensely, and then after that, then the crisis occurs of the growing thing in you running away. So and you combine that with you're in a house that you don't belong to. You're in a house that you don't belong to. The fourth is looking at you like, I'm invisible to everybody now but you, you know, and I'm looking at you like you were the first time. After that scene's been set, suddenly the growing thing runs into the crowds and gets lost in the crowds. So, I mean, that to me is a, if I had that dream, you know, I would, that is how I would kind of look at it is that, well, you know, my dreams, I'll have the Anima comes up to the clock, and she'll move the minute hand to the top of the hour, you know, and she's saying, it is time, it is highest time. You know, it's sort of a call to adventure. You know, I mean, is now is the time. How about anybody else?
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin, and then maybe Charles, and go around. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Kevin.
yeah, I can be totally wrong, Ivan. For me, this is just, you know, obviously, or at least I'm practicing. I would assume there is a fluffy side to you, which is symbolized by the dog, and which you're trying to direct that part of yourself towards your wife as a personal wife, or as an objective, your anima. And I also think that the child is, I think in this case, perhaps also a symbol of the self. You know, the self is running away from you. You're chasing the self. It's, you know, you're it's playing around basically by the collective. And I think that sort of is connected to the plant or the root that which you are taking from the ground. I think that's connected somewhat to the child. There is a dream. This guy, before he came to a Sufi seminar, he dreamt that he was driving towards the sun, which is more the masculine way of approaching the self. And after the seminar, after all of this ritual you do, for example, in Sufism, he dreamt that he was waiting for the sun, you know, the more feminine principle. And I feel like this dream is somewhat of reflection of the masculine approach towards the self, and that now the child is running and you can't get it. And the dream also comes with, you're pulling a root. So there is some sense of knowing, perhaps at times we also need to do or approach it in a more feminine way. And yes, something like that.
The flowers have been uprooted. I forgot about that. There's an aspect, it's ragweed, of course, but there's an aspect of something is the roots are being pulled up, you know. So I would say all four of those images are very stark. Ivan, you have those cool dreams. What about you, Charles? And then with Sandy and Gary and Adam? I'm just going counterclockwise.
Yeah. You know, I don't know. Whenever I hear about like the dog being in the dream, it always makes me think of the Fool tarot card. That's just kind of my go-to symbolism, and it's I don't know. It's a really interesting dream. Like you have this. The fourth thing in this case is an animal. Mm-hmm. It's a living, breathing thing, an animal. Yeah, I don't know, the idea of like how you said, Craig, like the growing thing being like the child, like is leading him on some sort of like chase, and maybe the only way he's going to find him or reach him is with the help of the dog. But in order for that to happen, in order to get the dog on your side, so to speak, the plants need to be put back in the garden and rooted again.
Yes. Yeah, I really like
that's my interpretation.
I think the shift in scenes is beautiful. You know, the stark from this sort of a scene of judgment to then suddenly a crisis occurs. What do you think, Sandy? You always have a wise word.
I don't know. I found this really interesting. I tried something new this week in my own dreams, and that was to be with almost the least likely thing in the dream, and kind of provided some really cool stuff. So if this was my dream, I'd be very tempted. The dog was looking at you, Ivan. I'd be very tempted to just sit with the dog and just look at the dog. Kind of like that.
That's an interesting
Behold
idea.
the image.
The fourth dog? The one
Right.
that was looking at.
Yeah. And just in a very gentle way, as if you were trying to coax a deer to eat out of your hand, would just be to say, just to look, that behold the image thing, and see what would happen from there.
Seems like a really good object for active
That's
imagination.
what I was thinking. I thought that would be a good jumping off point. That would be what I would do. But
You know, one thing, Ivan, though, to get a kickstart on that active imagination, be the fourth dog looking at you.
oh yeah,
You know,
yeah,
go in there and go into the fourth dog's eyes, and then look at you standing in the backyard, and try to do that, and then switch back to yourself looking at the dog, and just go back and forth a couple times. You know, and I mean that to me is a way to kickstart some of these things, rather than just me looking at it. I go in and I want to look at myself through whatever personification I'm encountering, and I want to see me. I even have the forest look at me, and the trees look at me, and the ground look at me, and you know, I want to, and then I say, what do they have to say? You know, and then I the ground speaks to me and tells me something that the ground might say.
that's yeah. I think you're onto something there, because I forgot. That's what I did this week. Is I had that part speak to me first.
Yes. I mean, that's a way to get it jump started. I mean,
Yeah.
the whole idea is you want the imaginal to speak. And if you just sit around and wait for it, sometimes nothing happens. So rather than just inventing something, go into that being, and then as natural as you can, speak to yourself, and tell yourself what the fourth dog has to say to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know. Well, how about you, Gary? You're staring at the ceiling.
Yeah, puzzling this out. This is a good one. So the fourth dog is black and the other dogs are white, right?
No, the fourth dog is white, and it was in a cardboard box. It was tiny, and it was glaring.
Yeah.
Had
Oh,
black
it's
eyes, though.
tiny. It's tiny. Well, you see, that means that, you know, I mean, if it's an instinct, it's like, it's neglected, you know, it's the one that's had the least, you haven't fed it, you know, it's in this little box, you know, it's been like, but so, you know, but it's interesting because we have the aspect of there's the neglect, and then there's the uprooting. So I'm just kind of going through the major themes, you know, so neglect, uprooting, and then the chase. And somehow, you know, that chase is related to the other two. So, you know, I
The
guess
crisis.
yeah, the crisis. Yeah. So, yeah. And when you talk to the dog, you know, try to feel its position, you know, like, is it real tense or is it kind of floppy? I mean, you know, feel its posture and stuff before you kind of make the transference into it. You know, try to feel what the dog is, feel in a very doggish way.
Yeah.
Well, how about you, Adam?
I guess the things that struck me most were, by the way, I thought what everybody said was really interesting, is like the urgency of the situation. I mean, it sounds like you have something that's really important to you, and if you don't run after it, something really bad could happen, you know, and that's like sort of like a negative motivation, but it seems like there's a whole lot of promise in some way. It's whatever it is that it sounds like you've been ignoring or not wanting to see, because it's not even just that you've been ignoring it maybe, but it needs you to look at it, you know. That's my impression. It's almost like a cry for help without maybe putting too sharp a point on it, you know, but it's like, hey, look at this now.
Yeah, there is a sense of urgency. I mean, there's an aspect of neglect, and then to me, there's just this foreboding of 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 something needs the redeeming thing needs to appear. You know, there seems to be a unknown curse or enchantment or something. You know, that's not the right word, but I mean, I just think there's an unknown. The fourth dog appearing mysteriously is invisible to the other three dogs. The uprooted plants, the fact that you can't really get the wife to see it, and the fact of the intense gaze. The fact that it's small is I think, like Gary says, it could be that it's either it's the new thing that's going to occur. It's if it's a child, it'd be, I mean, a young dog. It's somewhat analogous to the young child running into the crowd. So there may be an identity there, you know. But anyway, does anybody else have some words of wisdom? And then we'll if you want to reconvene tomorrow at 10, we'll be here. And we're just, I'd like to hear what everybody has to say about problems with active imagination, you know. And then maybe next week we'll do Charles and Sandy and Gary start. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was thinking of where the dog was in terms of its positioning.
Yeah.
And the garden can also be a symbol of the soul.
Yes,
and I was thinking
backyard.
that, yes, and so I don't know, but at least a dog is somewhere not in your, you can say, ordinary place, or a place where you feel like you know quite yet. You know, it's still not your backyard, but there is some familiarity in terms of its, you know, the playground of for the dog. So I think that's yeah, I don't know, something there.
It's beautiful. All the dreams are beautiful. I'll tell you, every one of them I'm going to be thinking about all week. And I just mean that. I mean, you know, like we say every time, these genuine products of the unconscious. For Adams, I would really, I've already got a drawing. I might color it a little bit. But that's an active imagination, is to draw your dream. You don't even have to do any active imagination. Just drawing the dream is an active imagination. Jung said, go ahead.
I was thinking of Ivan, if he had something to add. I felt like everyone.
Yes, Ivan, why don't you have the last word here?
So what I really like about this group is just, Kevin, you were mentioning something about you could be wrong, but actually I think just the discussion of it and the capturing of the symbols for me is really helpful. There's oftentimes symbols that I wouldn't normally, I guess I'm blind to some extent, that other people know and suddenly become interesting to me. And I feel like that helps me connect with them more. The other thing that I'm still trying to make sense of, besides the ragweed, is this idea of this school and this crowd. I felt like there was another symbol there, but I wasn't sure what that
place
meant.
of wisdom. The child is running towards the place of wisdom.
Yeah, the place of wisdom, like the people there are not helping at all, right? Like in general, if you saw a child, you know, running through this crowd, you might do something, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, I know you did some meditation before, but I don't know if you're still doing some meditation before. And the school is a place where you're learning something. And that's why also I said the child is also perhaps a symbol of the self. You know, it's running. It's something that hasn't been grasped because it's still running. And, you know, and I would ask myself, what can I do to make this kid stop running? You know, what can I do to make the self stop running? Because I think people have this tendency to make the self run because they are, it's just the way things, like, it's very easier to sort of, yeah, make it more complicated than it is. Sometimes it's best not to shout at the child, because in this way, perhaps they won't run. And yeah, so I would say that the school is some symbol of as aspect of learning, a part of yourself which is an aspect of learning, and it's somewhere between there. That is not, I would say, quite helpful. You know, the child is still running around.
The child is actually kind of like the philosopher's stone. It's the third thing. The redeeming is it has a aspect of it is redemption. And when it's running to the school, it kind of reminds me of when Jesus, when he was 12 years old, goes to the temple, you know, and I mean, there's an aspect of this growing thing that goes to the place of wisdom, you know, and you maybe you can follow it or you cannot follow it. And that I'm talking about, when we're talking about you, we're talking about the ego, you know, the ego that's not really involved in all this symbolic world, and it's sitting around looking at it, and it doesn't really belong here, and it's all kind of bewildering, you know, and yet it's the divine drama inside of us that's going on that we're standing apart from instead of being a part of, you know. Well, anyway, thank you, everyone. And we'll, I just keep these going until I'm dead, and then somebody else has to take over. Okay. Thank you, everybody. We'll
See you
talk
next
to you
time,
later.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye.